Chapter 11, Breach of Contract. Historically, at common law, most breaches of contract were analyzed based on the doctrines of material breach and substantial performance. However, contracts for the sale of goods were analyzed based on the perfect tender rule, which provided in essence that a seller breached a contract for the sale of goods if the seller failed to make a perfect tender of the goods. As you saw in Chapter 10, the code contains the perfect tender rule. In Section 2-601, but notwithstanding its apparent requirement for a perfect tender, the seller is not in breach of contract until the seller's opportunity for cure has passed. In case of an installment contract, the analysis of a seller's breach is similar to a substantial performance analysis. Oh my God. Thus, I just wrapped my hair around the chair. Okay. Thus, the performance analysis studying Chapter 10 is actually an analysis of breach of contract as well. Present breach, 1.1. When a contract party fails to perform when analysis is due, and the failure to perform does not excuse the party has breached the contract. We've already studied some of the ways seller can breach a contract by failing to deliver at all, by failing to deliver a proper quantity of goods, by failing to deliver in a timely manner, failing to deliver conforming goods. As you see, the buyer can respond differently to a seller's breach depending on the nature of the breach. The buyer does not always have the power to cancel a contract in the face of a non-conforming tender. For example, notwithstanding the so-called perfect tender rule, a seller who fails to make a perfect tender and has therefore breached the contract is entitled to attempt to cure if the time for performance has not arrived, and sometimes even after the time for performance is passed. Breach by anticipatory repudiation. Sometimes in advance of a date set for performance, a contract party signifies to the other party that he or she does not intend to perform. Repudiation occurs before the time the performance is due and defined in Comment 1 to Section 2-610 as an overt communication of intention or an action which renders performance impossible or demonstrates a clear determination not to continue with performance. In the face of a breach by anticipatory repudiation, the aggrieved party has the options listed in Section 610. Await performance by the repudiating party for a commercially reasonable time, resort to any remedy for breach, and C, in either case, suspend his own performance. If the aggrieved party has not canceled or materially changed his position in reliance on the repudiation, the repudiating party can retract his repudiation until performance is due. To fully understand 2-610, be sure to read official comments carefully. Not only will you find definition of repudiation, but also you will see a test for determining whether an anticipatory repudiation has occurred. When a lawsuit is based on an alleged anticipatory repudiation, special issues arise with respect to the applicable statute of limitations. Begins to run upon the date when a right to institute and maintain a breach first arises. Since 2-610 provides that the aggrieved party may resort to any remedy for breach upon an anticipatory repudiation, it follows that the statute of limitations begin to run at the time the non-breaching party learn of the anticipatory repudiation. And the more complex remedy issues are discussed in Chapter 12. 1.3, demand for adequate assurances of due performance. It is sometimes difficult to determine whether an apparent repudiation is actually a breach of contract or whether the possible repudiator is simply equivocating or trying to open negotiations with the other party. The code provides a mechanism to enable the seller or buyer after the contract formation stage, but before the tender of goods, to remove uncertainty or insecurity regarding whether performance will actually take place. Section 2-609 provides that when a party has reasonable grounds for insecurity with respect to performance by the other party, the insecure party may make a demand for adequate assurances of due performance and suspend his own performance until he receives such assurance. If the recipient of a justified demand for adequate assurances fails to respond in a timely manner, the code states that he has repudiated the contract. As you can see, there are then two key decisions to be made in connection with an application of 2-609 when does a party have reasonable grounds for insecurity? In other words, when is the party justified to make a demand for adequate assurances of due performance? And B, when is an appropriate demand for adequate assurances of due performance. So with respect to the first question, you've got reasonable grounds example. You've got the case there, AMF versus McDonald's, and some exercises. And I'm going to end chapter 11 there.